These are 7 books that you need to read that will make you feel something, that will hit right there in the best and worst ways.
It's so good.
Buckle up and let's talk books. All the books that I'm going to share today are fiction, and I've been enjoying reading fiction so much. I do have a Goodreads if you want to check that out. Where to begin? In no particular order, let's talk some of the best books that I've read in a while. I definitely think my reading preferences have definitely been more mature lately. I feel like I've been gravitating more towards adult type. Some of these books are still like young adult. Whether you're an avid reader or not, I feel like these books will be perfect for you if you want to get into reading. These will definitely make you feel something deep inside, and if you're already an established reader and you've been reading for a minute, you either know and already have read these books, or I'm about to convince you to read them. Colleen Hoover. Oh, what a woman. If you are on Book Talk, which is the book side of TikTok, you've definitely heard of these books and you've definitely heard of this amazing woman. She follows me on Instagram. For some reason, I love you. She quickly became one of my favorite authors simply after reading this book. It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover. This was probably one of the first more mature romance books that I read. I felt like up until this point I was reading more, like I said, young adult, teenage, like high school romance drama type books. I feel like what drew me to this book was that the scenarios are so realistic to, I feel like, what happens in real life. I will give a trigger warning for this book if you are sensitive to the topics of sexual abuse or abuse. Just keep that in mind, but this was so well written. I have never read a book so fast. Usually I'll take 2 or 3 days, which I was like, I am flying through these books. This took me like 6 hours. And I'd do it again. I would read this again if I could simply erase my mind. You get so attached to the characters. There's 2 main characters, Lily, and the other main character's name is Riley. She and him have a very complicated relationship that just spirals into this all-consuming love, and it gets messy, very messy. Lily is faced with some really hard decisions on how to handle the relationship, how to handle other things that are going on. Her first love of her life comes back into her life. I don't want to spread any drama or rumors. That's not my style, but I will say I've been hearing rumors about this being a movie. I will be first in line at the ticket stands. Thank you. Colleen has so many books that I still want to read, but the other one that I read was Ugly Love. The way this book was written was so interesting. It was an alternating timeline, so you go between 2 of the main characters in the book. I'm just gonna put this out there. When my heart gets so kindly torn from my chest because of these amazing authors, I will usually sit in bed like this, staring at the ceiling, and that'll usually last like an hour tops. Here was my reaction after I finished this book.
I just finished the book. It's so good. A book has not made me feel something like this in very long. I am not well. Oh,
there are freaking teardrop marks on this book because I was sobbing over it. I was kind of taken by surprise by how sexual this book was. So if you're under 18, please be advised of that. I liked it. This is one of my 5-star reads. I have seen some not super good reviews. Obviously, everyone is allowed to have their own opinion. I just got so sucked into the storyline of this book, trying to figure out the characters. It's an alternating timeline between the present, what Tate, the main girl, is experiencing, and alternates to the boy Miles, whose chapters are from years ago. And it kind of explains his past and why things are happening. I don't want to put any spoilers. I'm not going to put any spoilers in these videos. I try to give you my opinion without giving anything away, and you can always read the synopsis of the book. I'm just trying to tell you how I feel. So throughout the book, you're uncovering why Miles is the way he is, while Tate is just falling more and more in love with him. Shit gets messy. Will they end up together? Will she uncover what's wrong? Or will it end horribly? You gotta read to find out. I will say I hardly rate books 5 stars on my Goodreads and in my brain. I love Colleen Hoover. If you want to have tears running down your face for hours after you're done reading this, read it. Slowing it down to more of a young adult read, I read I'll Give You the Sun a few months ago, and I loved the storyline. This book follows the story of a pair of twins, Noah and Jude. This is another alternating timeline book, which I personally really enjoy when books are like that, especially if it helps the storyline. You go between the past and the present of the two twins, and one, I will say this was a little bit harder for me to get into because the chapters were so long. I feel like I'm personally someone who is okay with like an 8 to 20 pages of chapters. Wait, some of the chapters I felt like were 80 pages long, but there's like line breaks and stuff, so it's fine. There is family drama in this book, personal development drama, not knowing who you are in the midst of tragedy, a little bit of love and romance. It's really interesting. There's so many pieces to this book. I found this to be more of a lighthearted read. I feel like the other two books I shared definitely pulled on some emotions that sometimes were uncomfortable, but this one not so much. I still really loved reading it, and I feel like throughout the story you're kind of rooting for the twins to find their way back to each other because tragedy has happened in their family that caused them to go completely opposite ways. And this was a really nice read. I really liked how everything kind of came full circle in the end, and a lot of things clicked that weren't clicking when I was reading, which I really enjoyed. I read The Midnight Library really not knowing what to expect. I hadn't really read the synopsis of the book. I've only heard people talk about it online, and I picked it up not knowing what I was in for. And boy, I was in for it. This book follows the story of a woman named Norma who has a lot of regrets in her life, and things weren't really aligning or going too well for her, which led to her being super unhappy and unfortunately led to her attempting to end her life. But instead of arriving at death's door like she had wanted, she is in this in-between limbo state between life and between death called the Midnight Library. She's in this library, which I think she thinks is a figment of her imagination, but is very real at the same time. Kind of confused on that. I don't know. Hold on. It's this entire library that stretches for miles and miles, filled with books, and each book represents a life that she could have had she made different decisions. And this book kind of proved that it's little things in your life that change the course of how it goes. As she's in this state between life and death, this limbo state of mind, I don't know if that's a good way to describe it, but that's what I'm gonna say. Basically, Nora gets to try on these different lives that she could have had she made other decisions. And these are lives that were completely different from, she calls it her root life, so her real life. She has the possibility of staying in these lives, living out her life if she finds the perfect fit. But the catch is that if she doesn't find herself being truly satisfied in a life, she ends up back at the Midnight Library. She gets to try on all these different lives, and I will say, this book kind of felt like self-help disguised as fiction. To me, the ending was slightly predictable. You're gonna have to read it and see what happens. Does she find a new perfect fit of life and lives happily ever after, or does she die? What do you think? I've heard very different reviews on this book. Some people really liked it and said that it really helped put life into perspective for them. Personally, I enjoyed this book. I feel like the lessons that the author is trying to convey and get across in this book are very obvious. You may or may not have seen this coming. Emily Henry. I read Beach Read over the summer, which is probably one of the most hyped up books on Book Talk, and I was so excited to read it. Did it live up to my expectations? Yes. Did it leave my heart wrenching, squished? No. Which honestly I'm kind of thankful for, because I really gotta space out how many books tear through my soul. I don't want to read too many of those in a row, but I still think the romance storyline of this was not predictable, and I loved reading it. It just felt very real. There's two main characters in this book, both of whom are writers. You got January and Augustus. She happens to move next to him. There's a lot of tension. He is definitely the type of writer that is intense, likes to write about real life shit, and you've got January, who loves a good happily ever after romance. They are polar opposites. Augustus has some trauma from his past that puts a lot of tension on his and January's relationship, which makes the story really interesting. They're neighbors for the summer. What happens? I would tell you, but I'm not gonna give it away. It was the perfect amount of that I needed. You know what I mean? So let's talk People We Meet on Vacation, which I feel like is extremely popular. I don't know if as popular as Beach Read. I really liked this book. It took me a few chapters to get into it. I feel like I wasn't really getting connected or sucked into the book, but once I got like here, I finished it really quickly after. It's a story about two best friends who, since they met, go on an annual summer trip, but obviously sometimes shit happens. You don't really find out what has caused such a big divide in their amazingly strong friendship until a little bit later in the book. Poppy is a lively New York City gal who's trying to revive this friendship that means so much to her, and Alex is a little bit more of a reserved teacher from... She's this New York City gal, and she plans a summer vacation for them to go on in hopes of reviving their friendship that was ruined. It gets a little spicy. Okay? They are really opposite people who complement each other so nicely, and I feel like they don't realize that, which is a little frustrating. You're like, literally just date. This is another book that has an alternating timeline, so it switches between the present of them on this current summer vacation trying to repair their broken friendship and switches to past annual summer vacations that they have been on together. They have a lot of history. They could have a future. What happens? I love these books. I think Emily Henry might become one of my favorite authors. I love her writing. There's some spice, some drama. What more can you ask for? It's great. I just finished All the Bright Places last night. This was a hurtful read. I will say that. I'm still kind of recovering from it. I feel like all these books I've had time to process, but this is still a fresh wound. This kind of took me back a little bit to a high school setting. It follows along two characters. It's another alternating timeline between Violet and Finch. They are two very complex characters who happen to meet in a very interesting circumstance. Violet suffered a tragedy of losing someone really close to her, and Finch has had a lot of issues surrounding his mental state of mind. He's constantly contemplating ending his life, and he's gone through some really tough phases, but he's constantly searching for something to make him feel alive, to make him feel, as he says, awake. Violet and Finch meet. This book hurts my feelings. But it is such a good read. It's a Netflix film! I gotta go. I have to go. If you're looking to get your feelings hurt by a book, please feel free to check this out. They end up getting extremely close despite how opposite they are, despite Finch being the school freak, and sometimes Violet is embarrassed of that, but they end up getting extremely close, and he ends up being one of the only people she can talk to, and she ends up being a reason for him to stay awake. A heart-wrenching, unflinching story of love shared, life lived, and two teens who find each other while standing on the edge. The way this book was going halfway through, I was like, I don't know if I'm into these types of books anymore. Ones that are like based in high school, I feel like I've kind of matured out of them. This one was definitely an exception. I did not expect this. And that, my friends, is 7 books that you need to read. Some tore my heart out of my chest, others gave it a good little beating, but either way, I think these are books that you will love. Obviously, everyone's opinion is different. I feel like I still have yet to read a book that I simply did not like. These are all 4.5 to 5-star reads. If you want to check it out, I do have a Goodreads. I feel like I get questions on that a lot. I'll have that link down below, and I'm constantly letting you guys know what I'm reading on Instagram, so you guys should definitely follow me there. All these books I will link down below so you can read them for yourselves. Tell me your thoughts on these if you have read them, no spoilers, in the comments please, and comment down below more books that you think would tear my heart out of my chest, please, and thank you. I would really appreciate it.